Hello, good day, and thank you for coming to this seminar for ELISA. What we're going to be talking today about is what we're doing about automating adherence to the safety profiles after fixing vulnerabilities. We've got a lot of work to do in order to adhere to a safety profile and do safety analysis. But the question is coming up, especially as more and more open source software is being used in safety, is how do we deal with vulnerabilities that are coming in, and we need to make sure that we're still adhering to safety profiles. So my name is Kate Stewart. I work at the Linux Foundation, focusing on what we can do to make embedded systems be dependable. So safety, security, maintainability, reliability. And as part of that, I work with a variety of projects like ELISA is obviously one of them, and then Zephyr and a few others. You can also see me because involved with the transparency and software bill of materials initiatives. And this talk is trying to bring this all together. So a lot of the things that we're sort of seeing and trying to figure out how we can do things strategically for automation and working with vulnerabilities is the background here. And then Nicole, who's a bit of the colleague here in the safety working group in SPDX, the FUSA group in SPDX, as well as working with me on ELISA and Zephyr, is here as well today. So ELISA, you want to introduce yourself, Nicole?
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Nicole. I'm a safety expert, safety specialist for quite some time now. I'm part of Electrometis, and we are doing safety projects, safety consulting, safety certification support, mainly functional safety, working with generally critical systems. I am, as Kate already said, and also involved in the LF safety critical projects like ELISA and Zephyr. Bringing all this together, as Kate already said, we started with making functional safety profiles using SPDX, and that's what we'd like to talk about a little bit today. So what we want to do today generally is giving you an overview, a short introduction, what's functional safety and what are the safety profiles that we want to talk about here, and how we can use these for the projects that we are currently working on, like the Open APS that we use in the ELISA medical group, or in more detail, how we can use these safety profiles for the Zephyr project. And then really showing you what are the benefits of using this approach on the long term. Oops. So when we talk about safety critical systems today, a system these days usually is a system of systems, or it's a system built out of components and modules. Usually one or more microcontrollers, maybe some hypervisors, one or more operating systems, safety critical ones, non-safety critical ones, a safety critical application, one or more of these on top, and all this build and development information that you have in your tool chain. And mainly this system view and managing and analyzing all the challenges there is done here in the ELISA systems group. So if you want to know more about how these things can be built together, you can have a look into this group. And so generally, when we talk about functional safety, what it's aiming for is, on the one hand side, that you have a robust and suitable system, so a system that can, on its design, already withstand the safety challenges, is that it's completely suitable, that you have tested and analyzed everything, and that you used a specific process and specific methods and worked in a very straightforward way, in a defined way, to implement, develop, test, and maintain the system. And in reality, this looks a lot like you're mainly producing a lot of documents. So on the one hand side, you focus on having a good, great, safe system. And on the other hand side, you generate this lots of documents specifying what you want to do in your plans, what you want to achieve in your requirements, what you're aiming for, having your implementation somewhere in between, having your tests, having your test reports, having some configuration or calibration data. So in the end, functional safety is always, have a safe system, and please document what you've done for your safe system and what's inside of your safe system. So just one point before we start all this discussion about functional safety and compliance and documentation. Yes, safety is a system property. So if you want to see if something is safe in the end application, you always have to have a look on the complete system and on the things you want to achieve with the system. But additionally to having a safe system, you need to provide all this information that you not only have planned and specified a safe system and maybe ship a completely different system. You need to make sure that you really develop, release, ship, maintain, test, whatever, exactly the system as you have specified it. And here we talk about the term systematic capability, which is a general assumption that yes, you have done everything like planned and like specified, and that the system you provide really can fulfill the safety claims that you have made at the beginning. So mainly say, okay, we want to have a safe software or safe system, and providing the evidence for the systematic capability is the way to show that the software is really capable to perform as intended in a safe way. Following certain safety principles exactly to provide this systematic capability usually comes down to the same things that are defined in the safety standards. So when you look into the mainstream safety standards, it really always focuses on unique IDs of documents, of things, of data, to make sure that you always have the right stuff. You need to have the dependencies between things, need to know where does stuff come from. You need to know exactly what you have built, why you have built it. You need to document all that stuff. And a very important point, you need to have requirements, which are then the description on what you really have intended to do, what you have intended to be in as a functionality or as a property in your product. So when you look into what you need to provide for functional safety, first thing usually is look in a safety standard, in a more generic one or in a detailed one for your application. But in the end, it always comes down to, unique IDs, traceability, evidence of completeness, and evidence of compliance to the standard. And for this, it's really important from the beginning to define your dependencies, also dependencies inside of your project. So what things depend on each other inside of your project, and keep them up to date until the end, until you retire your project. So the main dependency model in functional safety still is the good old V model. V model is nothing else than a dependency model when we look into dependencies within a project from the functional safety view. All these plans, all these guidelines, qualification evidence that you have as a foundation of your functional safety management, actually they are the dependencies of the requirements and everything that you need to create. So it's always depending on what is defined, how to do there, how should I do things. And also the V model itself is just a chain of dependencies. So what it comes down to at the beginning, you create this once, you have your dependencies in mind, but these dependencies then, if you know them, already help you to keep your documentation up to date, to keep your all your evidences up to date, throughout the maintenance of your product, throughout fixing vulnerabilities, throughout product updates, and whatever, let's say, subset of product or different scope of product you want to ship.
So assuming we can get these types of dependencies and put them in place and have them traceable, we're going to be in a reasonable place for actually doing maintenance. So after, since a lot of these components at this point in time are open source, and we all know bugs happen in open source, understanding if you've applied a fix and you are done, when something has a safety critical aspect, means we have to revisit our dependencies, and we need to basically be able to look at an entire system as a whole. So the requirements let us know we're done, and but we also need to make sure that, okay, how can we all trace this? Right now it's done in spreadsheets and very manual, which does not take us to scale and the automation at scale we're going to be needing in the years to come, especially with the rates of vulnerabilities going on. So one of the concepts that's out there right now is a software bill of materials, and this is a machine readable, so we can identify components, dependencies, and relationships between them, and that's in the minimum requirements. And then if we start working with our different types of relationships that we need, we can start to create a knowledge graph around it. And so SPDX project has most of it in there, what we need for today, and we're adding a little bit more in the 3.0 release and further releases. So the form will be a safety profile, probably showing up in 3.1, and we're busy prototyping it out right now. And what they're trying to do is make sure we can put these full safety cases together with all the evidence linked. So next slide. Now, for those who are not familiar with SPDX, it's an ISO standard, and it has been around for over 11 years, 12 years now at this point. And what it's trying to do is let you track back from binaries to source files. And what we're doing is also looking at the different types of SBOMs that are emerging to take it back into the evidence for the design and some of these other pieces of information around the safety use case. Next slide. So SPDX itself is a language for expressing metadata about software, and it has some key abstractions in them. One of, so you can represent and understand groups of things. We call them packages, and it's more than just package manager outputs. It's, a tarball is a group or a package. Individual files or even parts of files. So you have those abstractions to work with, and then you also have a rich set of relationships that you can work with in order to identify the information that's there and attribute various properties to it. Next slide. So what we're really focusing on, really, leveraging and extending to do this system analysis is the relationships. And that, with the next slide, you'll see there is actually a very rich set of relationships already in SPDX as part of the 2.2. And you'll kind of see as you start looking through there, there's ones that are actually quite relevant to the safety cases, things like requirements and specification for are already out there and available today. There's things like generating, there's things like tests, test tools of, test cases of. There's various dependencies, there's documentation of, build tools, and so forth. So these types of relationships are already sort of in there, and they're being used in the wild already today by various tooling. And what we're going to be trying to do is see where we can extend to actually capture this evidence for the safety cases, and then have it so we have a knowledge graph that can effectively be queried and used for testing overall. So next slide. One of the things that's been emerging in the last couple of years is the concept of a software bill of materials. And the security and safety information configuration management, it has to be maintained throughout the software lifecycle. So collecting it and summarizing and putting out SBOMs at the various stages of the lifecycle is sort of something that can be designed to be done in a system. And then leveraging this, we actually have the way of querying them through the relationships of various knowledge graphs and understand how things are hooking together. So if you go to the next slide, an SBOM, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is been sort of standardized as a definition of a minimum set of elements. And things like a supplier name, who actually gave you this, what's the name of this component? Is it Linux? Is it Zephyr? Is it Zen? What is the component name? What is the version of this component? This helps you identify these things, and this is what the safety standards are looking for anyhow. and other unique identifiers, pearls, CPEs, other things that you can let to find the component in the ecosystems, and then the dependency relationships. Now, the NTI minimum is just defining a depends on. But as you can see from SPDX, we've got a much wider set to play with that lets us connect these components and provide more knowledge about how they are interacting as well. And then the last thing is a timestamp, so you know things haven't changed out from under you. Now, it's okay, go ahead, Nicole, thanks. The CISA, there's a CISA working group that has recently published, where there was a lot of people talking past each other for the last couple of years. And people who are working with our bill of materials were having a certain view in mind, and people were working with, oh, this is the output of my build. They had their view in mind. And so over the last year, there was work to do to define a sort of a standard set of SBOMs types that could be used. For the most part, the security people have been focusing on the build SBOM, and the legal folk are generally focusing on the sourcing SBOMs. On the other hand, for doing risk analysis and OSPOs, you need to know what's actually been built together from a licensing perspective. So there's a lot of use cases that are out there that are behind these types. One of the types that was introduced recently was the notion of a design SBOM. And this is where we're looking at exploring and extending what is possible to capture these safety cases. But through the life cycle, beforehand, you're doing your design, you're putting your requirements together, you're collecting this information, then you're creating your sources, you're putting your sources, you're integrating them, building images, you're deploying them within your test frameworks, and checking that your components are validated. That's what the V model is calling for. And then you're putting a whole system together with all these components integrated. So design, source, build, deployed, and runtime are the types of SBOMs we're going to be leveraging here. There's also a sixth type called analyzed. And what that's doing is someone's hands someone something and they're trying to discover as much as they can about it. In general, you're going to get more accurate information with the other types of information, other types of SBOMs, but these analyzed ones are out there in the ecosystem, so I just wanted to mention it for completeness. There's a link on the slides where you can read more about these SBOM types, and that's up on the CISA site. The US government's been doing a lot of work on this SBOM formation, but I think the European and the Japanese are also lining up with this rough definition at this point too. Next slide. And in fact, the Japanese have been one of the first ones that when they put this, I guess it's about a year and a half, over a year and a half ago now. Well, no, actually it's about a year ago. They put out the cybersecurity for critical infrastructure work plan, and very prominently in there, the areas to be improved, one of which was adherence to the safety profiles. So to do cybersecurity when you're working with critical infrastructure, i.e. something that has safety considerations, you're going to need to look at the safety profiles. And I don't think, we don't have a lot of infrastructure out there right now for automating the safety profiles. There's some proprietary tools and there's work that's done there, but what we want to try to do is make something that's possible to work with open source and open source components. And so the ELISA project is trying to tackle this because Linux is obviously a very key component that's used in a lot of systems. So next slide. So what we're sort of aiming towards is, well, let's generate these SBOMs with the data we know at various points in time in the software lifecycle. So using the source SBOMs when we're doing procurement and development, like you're bringing sources in, you're writing code, etc. When you actually start assembling it, testing it, and releasing it, build SBOMs are the appropriate type of information to capture, which has also the build information potentially. And then when you put it on a system, you know exactly how you put it on a system, so record that information then, and that's your deployed SBOM. And multiple components deployed onto a system, in a running system, the system gets updated underneath. So you might want to be working with something like a runtime SBOM as well. And these should all be able to tie back to the notion of what's happening at the design level for a system. And so this is what we're trying to explore with the FUSA group in the SPDX right now, is how we can all put this together. And we're also working very closely with the systems working group in ELISA, because they're looking at systems and how this is all going to pull together. So if you look at the next slide.
Yeah. So yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. So when we look into the safety life cycle, which is a loop as any other product life cycle. We can use these SBOMs to structure and release and sort our documents that we create for the safety life cycle. So the design SBOM, everything that we need in the beginning to structure our project, really, in the end, it's all these functional safety management, the plans, FUSA plan, requirements management plan, configuration management plan, all these plans that you set up in the beginning to define what you want to have. That's actually nothing else that goes than the stuff that goes in a typical design SBOM. Also, the safety concept or the highest level requirements that you have for the project that are very stable and that define what you want to have, that's also part of the design SBOM. I'd say for me as a software or a software person, the real magic then happens in the source SBOM, where you have your detailed requirements per component, your detailed software architecture, your source code, unit test cases, everything that's that let's say that you have for implementing what you want to have in your product. And then once you build everything, you can sort all this build information into the build SBOM when you deploy your builds, and you have all this information then on the deployed side that goes into the deployed SBOM. Really then these specific things about, have you deployed it to a test framework, to some emulation, or to some real hardware? What hardware, what specific hardware? Or what configuration do you use there? That's going then into the deployed SBOM, while then it's not over there. So your software will run and will live and will produce logging data, will maybe interact with algorithms. Maybe it's a machine learning algorithm that has some training data, whatever. That's then going into the runtime SBOM. So all that stuff that you can think of that you need to document your systematic capability of your functionally safe system, you can use your SBOMs to sort this information. So generically, this can look like this. So that's one of the first slides when we started to play around with this idea of using SBOMs and using relationships for documentation of functional safety. And you really said, okay, we have our design with the dependencies within the design SBOM. We have a safety concept plans, implementation guidelines. We have the source SBOM where the actual source code lives. Actually, the design SBOM stuff is doing the specification on what to do in the source SBOM. And once we have built it and have our first tests on unit level, we can have the build SBOM that is more or less generated. The executable is generated from the source code, but all the evidences, test reports, and all that is then evidence that the source code or that the source SBOM has been created as intended. So when we look into real life products like the OpenAPS, which, let's say from my point of view, is a system of systems. For those who are not familiar with this project, the OpenAPS is an artificial pancreas system for type 1 diabetics. So it's a system that closes the loop between an insulin pump providing insulin instead of the pancreas, and a continuous glucose monitor with a receiver unit about this data that's providing information about the actual blood sugar, blood glucose levels, and a controller board, a Raspberry Pi mainly, with some software on top that is doing the management on requesting what's the blood glucose, doing some math, using some data, pre-configured data, and then giving the data to the insulin pump, how much insulin needs to be administered to the patient. So what we did in the ELISA medical group is, we analyzed the system from the top down. We used SDPA really to analyze what are the system components and how do they interact with each other. And in the end, it comes down, we can see this OpenAPS system as in its completeness as a runtime, open so runtime view, where say everything is deployed, everything is put together, it's working as intended, hopefully. But when we look into it in the deeper side, actually this on the runtime we have deployments of different subsystems. We have on the one hand side the GCM receiver that works together with an application of OpenAPS called Night Scout to do the data management. We have this Raspberry Pi board with firmware, operating system application, the OpenAPS application, and we have this insulin pump that for sure also has some built software on it that comes out of a source code repository with information about why this medically safety critical insulin pump is suitable for usage on patients.
And I just will interject here that not all of this stuff is open source here. So for instance, the insulin pumps that are being used in this system are an FDA approved device where everything is hidden. On the other hand, so all you might know is that it's running, or you have access to know it's running. You may not be able to trace it back to the source. And we started looking at this because we're looking for Linux on this, and we had access to the open version of Linux here. So that's part of the background on this application. Keep going.
Exactly. And so what we were really looking into was mainly then this part, the OpenAPS application on the Raspberry Pi, together with the operating system, which is one version of Linux. Also, the Night Scout is part of the OpenAPS project and is open source. And more or less, we know that, let's say, these closed things that we just use, like the CGM receiver, the insulin pump, they have their own magic on why they are suitable, and as Kate said, FDA approved. But what we were really looking into is these openly available stuff for the OpenAPS to identify how it interacts with the Linux, most obvious in a kind of safe way. So what we are currently doing in the medical group is mainly creating information that would go into a design SBOM. So what we really found when we looked into this from a functional safety view, so what OpenAPS is doing really well is all this safety of the intended function things. So obviously these people don't want to kill themselves with the system. They want to improve their health and their quality of life. And there is much thought into how things are done in a safe way, but there is not so much done in what we would expect in a classic safety documentation way, like I said, in a plan, in a safety analysis, in requirements. So what we are currently doing is, on this model on the design SBOM level, really defining high-level safety requirements that are coming out of our safety analysis that we did from the beginning on, and to analyze the documentation that is there, and maybe add a layer of requirements as a design SBOM input for the OpenAPS. So yeah, when we think back about these principles of functional safe systems, yeah, what we really see here, yeah, we're adding documentation, we're adding requirements to add on, let's say, this compliance stuff for OpenAPS. So what then really needs to happen when we find, or when somebody finds an issue, or when there is a vulnerability, a security exploit on some part of a component that's used in the system? It's not only fixing this, let's say, the source code that causes this issue, but it's also then, yeah, starting again, thinking what are the dependencies, what things do I need to fix to, and what documentation do I need to update. And finally, yeah, once I had done everything, generate a new SBOM with all the updated information. So when we look into this from the system view, again, from OpenAPS, as Kate already said, the only thing that's openly available is the OpenAPS and the Night Scout part. So when we just think about, okay, how can we go through from, yeah, during runtime, we find some strange behavior on our complete OpenAPS system that, yeah, consists on the Raspberry and these other components like insulin pump and CGM. And we suppose it's a problem within our algorithm, within some component we use in our OpenAPS application. Then we really can go through, yeah, all the passes, say, okay, yeah, if it we do have a strange behavior on runtime, it must be somewhere on our, yeah, deployed setup on the Raspberry. Let's look into the build, go from the build to the sources and find, yeah, the bug there and update then, once we did this, all the dependencies and all the builds and build SBOMs. So let's say that's a very high, more or less for me, abstract system view level. But if you look into a little bit deeper, for example, into the Zephyr project, so for those who are not familiar with Zephyr, Zephyr is an open source RTOS. It's neutral regarding the hardware architecture. It's running on, it's really complete, integrated, highly configurable little RTOS. It's really modular, it's flexible, and it's been designed from the beginning with safety and security in mind to get, in the end, or safety certification for the Zephyr auditable branch. And what we are currently doing, let's say from the safety committee, is really updating all that stuff that we need. For example, yeah, what Zephyr currently delivers is this embedded RTOS. It's this build system for Zephyr and test cases as well, the test framework. What we currently don't deliver, but what we are creating with the safety committee and the safety working group is all these evidences for the systematic capability, like the functional safety management plans, doing the safety analysis and providing the evidence for completeness, for compliance, for test coverages and all that stuff that we need for our systematic capability. So looking into this on a more detailed view, so Zephyr here is, when we look into a system, it's just one component in the system. So, but also from the beginning here, we need all these information that's kept in the design SBOM. And this information already has a dependency in itself. So the central point is a Zephyr safety plan. In the safety plan, it's defined or specified what we should do for verification. So it's the specification for the verification plan. It's the specification for the configuration management plan. or the requirements management plan. And for the requirements management plan on its own is again the specification how to do requirements. So it's also the specification for the high-level software requirement specification. And when we take this information in the source SBOM and go one step further, because in the design SBOM go one step further, because yeah, what we want to have in the end is sources. We want to have source code. And we look into the components of Zephyr, like the kernel and everything. Then yeah, we have requirements and a design of components that are more detailed requirements of the software, high-level requirements. So also here we have a clear dependency that we can describe with our model. The requirements of the component then are the specification what should go into the code. On the other hand side, what also specifies how we should write code or how we should create code are coding guidelines and design guidelines that are depending on themselves again. For example, on the safety plan that specifies what methods, what standards, what coding patterns, whatever should go into code. So while the safety plan could be the specification for the coding guidelines are one source of specifications for the source code. And when we look into how we verify or test our source code, we also have then, as let's say specification level or input level documents, we have the coding guidelines that build the basis for the static analysis or the code review. So there's a specification for, let's say, the static software tests, while when you look into the component requirements, these are the requirements for the component or the unit tests. And even when you look into the generated results, test reports, the test logs, these are then the evidence for that the tests have been run. So yeah, for sure there are some dependency errors missing, because if you put everything in there, you can say, okay, the test reports are also evidence that this verification plan has been applied and all that. But I think you get the idea what we have there. And then when we take our build and go one step further, or we take our source and we go into the build, what we want to have in the end out of our sources is some executable image. And clearly the executable image is generated out of the source code. So there's a clear dependency. And also for test and for build environment or build change specifications, we have the clear dependencies here. So yeah, the big question is what to do with all that information and all that stuff. Yeah, the beauty comes in once I have an issue. I find I have some issue, some vulnerability in my executable, and I need to start to look for the root cause. Where does this come from? What do I need to do? So looking into my dependencies, I can see there are more or less, yeah, two possible sources for this. So yeah, as a software developer, I for sure look into the source code first, but as you can see here, it can't not only be the source code, the problem can also be in my build tool chain. So I need to analyze both. And yeah, assuming it's, as most cases, the source code, once I have found an issue in the source code, I also have to consider, where does this come from? Does this come from the requirements? Do I have an issue there? Might I have some gaps in my specification? Or is the problem in the coding and design guidelines? Do I structure my software in a way that's not suitable for my application? So, and even if you say, okay, it's my design specification of the component that has some flaw, that flaw also can come from an insufficient software requirement specification. So what I really want to show here is, once you have all these dependencies in place, you can use this to identify the sources of your vulnerabilities and all these things you need to change, that you need to adapt once you start implementing the fix. And the beauty in the end is, yeah, you might have an issue in the executable image, but you can really just pull there and find all the dependencies. Where could the problem be? And on the other hand side, how can you identify, or let's say regenerate in the end, that all your evidence is here and that you have everything done and you're complete and compliant and have every evidence that you need for functional safety in the end.
And so this part of being able to have that traceability back to the requirements and to the evidence is going to be at the heart of being able to say you are done if you're applying a security fix and you're trying to adhere to a safety profile. And so we've got the various documentation in a sort of design SBOMs. We have we have the source code, the tests, and some of the requirements for the code sitting in the sources. They are combined into a build SBOM to create that executable, so you know exactly which sources have made it in there. And ideally, for safety, you know exactly which source files are actually part of your executable, so you don't spend time fixing false positives. And that source executable is going to go into some test framework and run a set of tests to generate evidence. And that evidence will be used to analyze with prior evidence to make sure you've actually satisfied the requirements. So if we go and look at this in a little bit more detail, down at the requirement level, next slide. Each requirement, we can start doing a mapping to the actual source files that are associated with it, as well as the make information for doing the build of it. We also can map the tests in terms of which tests are satisfying and proving out which requirements. This is all part of your code coverage and traceability matrix. Now, taking those requirements and you build your SBOM and then you put that generated image into some test framework and run your tests, you get evidence out. And so you have a set of evidence associated with each requirement that you can sort of say, hey, this evidence will satisfy this requirement, and you have it all linked effectively. So this is what lets us start to look at doing things at scale and being able to mine things. So if we go to the issue, the next slide. Oops, next slide, Nicole.
Yeah, I'm just, it's not working.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll talk to it as soon as you can get me there.
Now,
get me.
now I have a completely blank screen here, so I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay. So the next slide is basically showing that we've got a problem in one of the C files, in one of the C source files, and from that we can sort of say, okay, if we fix that file, here is the requirement, and that is associated with it, which then tells us effectively what tests need to be rerun, and then, quite frankly, we can rerun it after applying a fix and getting evidence. Thank you.
Yeah, I just tried to share again, so sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks. So like I say, when we've defined that's it.
Is this the one? Okay.
And then if you want to go on, and so as you can sort of see, we just sort of marked that there's a bug fix going into that source file, and you're fixing that because you need to. But you know, you can go back to the requirements, and if you go to the next slide, hopefully that'll work. You know, one of the things is we may need to generate a new requirement. There may be a problem with the requirement. So this gives us a way of adding new requirements in and referring to, you know, what it's connected to from a source perspective, as well as, you know, any new tests that need to be affiliated with that requirement. Because it may be, you know, what code was there was fine, but but we didn't think of a use case. So that was sort of the scenario that Nicole talked about a little bit earlier. And then if we go on to the next slide, what this also lets us do is, you know, that source file may participate in more than one requirement. And, you know, we want to be able to go and look and see, well, if I touch this source file, what else should I go look at and what else should I go rerun? So there may be other requirements and other tests. And this gives us a way of creating that knowledge graph to understand, if I fix this one point in time, what else do I need to rerun automatically? Today, this is mostly done by spreadsheets and knowledgeable people in various projects, and the evidence has to be regenerated. And it tends to be slow, and a lot of people don't want to put security fixes in, or try to do the best to do workarounds to avoid doing security fixes because of this pain of this process. So figuring out how we can get this all automated and then get machines to reason about it behind the scenes and help generate the next steps so that we can keep things secure, and as well being able to adhere to the safety profile is, I think, the goal that we're really trying to get towards. So if you go to the next slide, we're sort of aiming in this point in time towards getting to the stage where we can use the safety profile. And so this is what SPDX is busy tackling right now, is being able to put these knowledge graphs in place behind the scenes and then work with various open source projects to put tooling in place to support this for requirements tracing and get this type of information available. You want to take it from here, Nicole, and just finish it off?
Yeah, so what we want to aim for, so what are the big benefits that we want to provide really with the safety profile, which is it's a knowledge graph, it's a model of dependencies and documents and information. And what we can see from here is that on the one hand side, it will support really, it will provide you the complete model, as I already said, and it will support you really effectively during impact analysis when you need to fix something, when you want to change something. What I see at the moment there, if you want to do this, you need really a big set of people with having information about the architecture, the code, the tests, the process, the coding guidelines, the tool chain, and all that stuff. So I won't say I want to make these people redundant. It's just when you want to gather this information and see all the dependencies inside of a project, this SPDX safety profile will be, at least to my knowledge, the first complete model that takes everything into account and shows you all dependencies within your project. And whatever information or analysis method you use, FMEA, Ishikawa, or what you want to provide, this can help you to really have a very effective and complete way to do things. It provides really reproducible results, both in the impact analysis, as you can pull the dependencies and don't need to run around on your floor and find the people to give you answers, where can this problem be? And also when you have all your fixes done and you want to generate the evidence that everything is complete, it's also reproducible because you exactly know where your dependencies are and where they should go to. And in the end, it's simply a formal way to demonstrate completeness after project tailoring, or when you build your system with a different scope for a different platform with different the subcomponents, really to show you in a very formal way what do you have and what are your evidences for that you have that you need to have. And as a last slide, for those friends of the V model that for sure are around from the safety world, in the end, all this information, all these dependencies from the V model can be just expressed with relationships. They can be part of the safety profile. And in the end, all these little documents, work products, they find their place in an SBOM. Simple as that.
And that gives us a very nice way of structuring the evidence and providing the evidence to the assessors, as well as being able to work with it internally. So the challenge right now is starting to come up with various examples, as you've seen a few of them that we've been starting to work through, and then making sure that we've got all of the right levels of models. So I guess if you go to the next slide, we're at this point of time where if people have questions, they're welcome to unmute or type in the chat, whatever is easiest. And while people are thinking about that, if people are interested in joining in on this type of analysis and have ideas of things they want to explore, they're welcome to join in on the ELISA systems level analysis working group, which is where this effort started from to some extent. And we started working on it pretty intensely in the SPDX working group. And so there's a call that goes on every week where we're sort of going through these cases and continuing to refine this with the view that the next release after this one will have all this information as a formal profile in SPX, and hopefully we'll have a few working examples in order to actually put it out there. And so if you're interested in these areas, feel free to reach out to Nicole or myself. You've got our information there. And I guess with that, does anyone have any questions?
Oh,
Hi.
there's one question on the chat.
Hey, Mark.
Hi. Can I just ask a quick question? Mine's more of a bottom-up question as opposed to a top-down. You guys did a really good job at talking about, the top level and how ultimately safety is about the whole system, right?
Right.
But I'm more interested at the moment in the Lego blocks, right? So let's take Linux. And Linux obviously has a user space and a kernel space, and within those spaces you have a bunch of packages or blocks, right?
Right.
What is we know from doing license analysis on a package, we know what the output is, and SPDX supports that well, right? We know that you might eventually create illegal notices as artifacts and provide source code. When it comes to security, you might provide a list of CVEs, right? Where export, you might provide some crypto insights. What would be, from a safety perspective, the artifacts you want to generate for each of those Lego blocks, which then can be brought into this system when you do the build and everything, that you could say this is kind of certified at some level for safety, and it could be, I guess, a binary, or it could be a source package. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what you'd be bringing in is you'd be bringing in probably your safety plans, because that will tell you your list of requirements. And then that goes to the requirements associated with the code. And we're looking at this from a component level, like from the very first slide, right? Linux is one of the things that are there. Zephyr's another one. Zen's there. There's an application sitting on top of them, how this all gets connected. What we're trying to do is get to the stage where it's very modular, and we can basically, for these sets of sources out of Linux, you can generate out evidence that it satisfies these certain requirements. And then if you wanted to assemble a system and those systems lined up with those requirements, you could be importing these analysis that's been done in other places together into a larger system. So trying to get it so it's modular and we can start to structure all this together, where there's analysis of requirements for certain portions that are shared amongst multiple uses. So Linux and the requirements behind Linux, there's work going on in the architecture group to look at, what are the requirements behind Linux, and they're looking at things like the man pages and articulating out what's important there, and as well as then how to start looking at analysis. And so there's another group in ELISA that's very much focused on that for Linux. For Zephyr, there's a group that's focused on, okay, well, what are the requirements of the kernel? And then we're looking at, okay, how do we build out for other components that are there? So we're trying to sort of structure the requirements associated with the sources that are there, and sort of make sure that the tests and the coverage is there as an output. So what the outputs will eventually look like is probably a set of documents and evidence that can be then handed to an assessor or handed to someone who's doing further integration.
Okay, thanks. I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about that and the work to do on a given package level, particularly say OpenSSL, right? And what kind of, I guess, requirements of stock or plans or whatever. That's really something I'd find interesting. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, you're welcome to come in and join us in some of these meetings and start to explore that concept, and we can start mapping it out and seeing what it might look like. We're trying to do it for some of the, like say, for Linux and Zephyr are the two we're focusing on right now. But if people have specific concepts and packages that they want to start looking at what this analysis would look like, it'd be very much a valuable contribution to the projects.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, there are two questions in the chat.
Okay.
One is, you discuss the iterative process of generation, finding issues, fixing issues loop. Are there examples from Openness or Zephyr that can be pointed to that show the steps as you have gone through them? Yeah, actually, not at the moment, because we are currently still in the process of applying on the one hand side, yeah, these principles of functional safety documentation to Zephyr, so making the safety harness or the design SBOM stuff around it. And on the other hand side, we are still in the process of creating the complete safety profile.
And so, like I say, the next question is maintaining requirements traceability of source code is a big task. And yes, we completely agree. And so this is why we want to work with various open source tools who will help us with this. There's a lot of commercial tools. There are some commercial tools out there, but we want things we can export and import from. And so I think Stanislav was on the webinar earlier, and we're hoping to work with StrictDoc and some of the other tools that are emerging. There's another one I think that Red Hat's looking at sharing with the world shortly as well. And there'll be a webinar about that in October, I think, or sometime soon. So, I think getting more tools out there that will work with hooking up the source and the tests and the requirements is one of the things that's going to be needed. And then as these tools are being created and enhanced, getting it so that it hooks up for importing and exporting the SPDX safety profile information, I think will let this stuff start to scale in a modular way. Any other questions? Did that answer things for you, Anthony?
Yes, thank you. I can think of big system of systems. I'm just thinking how it scales. I can see how it works with your Raspberry Pi. I'm just thinking about a rather larger system.
Okay. Well, like I said, there's going to be a lot of larger systems out there. And so examples to start thinking about is part of the reason, we did this webinar is, we know which we know, but we don't know a lot of other things. And so, examples of systems and, can this model work in even bigger systems that people are doing? I think we're trying to structure
legacy systems that have a lot of legacy, that are very slow, that live a long time, and technology changes over time slowly. And it's actually maintaining that safety case continually. I'm thinking of things like power networks and stuff like that. So how do you, looking at I love the concept, but I'm just wondering how scalable it is. I mean, spreadsheets is good if you can do it, but when you've got thousands of requirements and thousands of components in the large supply chain, it is quite a challenge. So yeah.
And I think there's, completely agree. The issue also is that there's parts that are open and there are parts that are closed. And so, like, in that medical device, the open APS, we're never going to get to see anything really in the details of what was, done in the proprietary device side of it. But we can at least account for it in our analysis and for the pieces that we need to do. So I think there'll be sort of that type of a hybrid approach for some of these longer tail systems that need to live for a long time. Where parts are known, parts are not known. But the more SBOMs that are floating out in the ecosystem, the more we can sort of build on what is there and build on the dependencies that they start to expose so that we can actually trace things appropriately.
Quick question to the proprietary piece. I understand it's a little bit of a black box, but would there be like some requirements on that proprietary vendor to provide certain evidence requirements docs and certain information as part of their deliverable? And is there like a standard list of that stuff for proprietary pieces?
I think that's what we're sort of trying to figure out, in the sense that, each every time you're doing something proprietary, there's usually a contract, and usually as part of that contract, there are requirements. The challenge is those are captured at a certain point, but they may not be captured in other points. And so this gives us a framework to start to plug that stuff in, so it can be monitored over time and so forth. That's kind of what we're trying for here, is to effectively create a knowledge graph on top of the built system, so that we query where we need to in order to make security fixes and still adhere to the safety profiles.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Jerry's asking in the chat, Automotive Group is working on tooling for code now for CodeCov and Arch to cover kernel code for the safety proving, where code goes for the telltale, I guess, safety part. So you're asking, Jerry, is like, where's the code going to, where should this all go? I think we should be probably putting it into some of the ELISA. If you've got some of that stuff, I think the ELISA repository is there, and certainly understanding more what's going on would be a really good topic for the next workshop for ELISA too. And so maybe that's something we can look at seeing if we can explore as for the next ELISA workshop to get together and start to explore this. I know both Nicole and myself will be there. And so, maybe doing a side working group about, okay, where should some of these pieces of evidence go from some of the analysis going on for the Linux kernel? Definitely. Did that answer things for you, Jerry? Or did I miss the point? Okay, just want to make sure I didn't miss the point. Okay, well, I think
I was observing a bit, but how they try to document and let's say they cover that telltale safety part.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say the tooling and documentation, the tool is quite ongoing, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're going to be exploring and creating a lot more tooling to really help with the analysis of the ELISA groups as well as others, and starting to pull this all together. We've done some work in terms of how do you start tracing what parts of the kernel are getting engaged with certain things. There's some work that's gone on for that right now, and I think more tooling about the tracing and so forth is going to be getting like the strict doc and other tools like that, working with being able to record this information and export it and import it is going to be the key, I think, for us to really make this infrastructure modular and work across the ecosystem. So definitely quite happy to work with anyone who's interested in helping us to solve this problem. And I think we're at time. So with that, I will say thank you very much for the good questions, and feel free to reach out. Nicole, any last thoughts?
I can also say thank you, and would be happy if I see you, at least some of you, on our Friday calls on the SPDX safety profile. So it's very European friendly. It's Friday evening or early evening, depending on your rhythm, and US morning. So would be happy to see you there and discuss this topic further.
Yeah, and if you're interested, just basically go to the mail list, subscribe, and the information about the meetings is over through that link. And if you can't do Fridays, the systems working group meets on Mondays, and we welcome discussions of system configurations and so forth. And we're busy working on a reference system that we'll be eventually trying to provide this analysis behind. So a simple application, working with Linux, working with the Zen hypervisor, working with Zephyr, on a set of hardware, and then coming up with a couple of requirements associated with probably using something like the telltale case or something similar, so that we can actually break it down and show all these pieces. So the systems group is where we're trying to pull this system level analysis with when Linux is a component together. So if you've got ideas there, including things working with Linux from a proprietary side or things like that, that's a good place for joining in and helping us look and explore these use cases. With that, thank you, everyone.